Try it now. He said it's on. When we gave it to him, Mike was number 2, channel song 3. Is that one cut off?
No, it was on, it's green, big light.
I didn't turn it on this time. I didn't know he was up there. I didn't unmute it tonight when he was up there, so. This is I was gonna make sure I don't know.
We're getting, oh, we just got it. All right. I think I'm going to turn my volume down. I can't, though. But what this does, it allows travel north and south, east and west. And in their time, in their world, that was an enormous thing. And so people, goods, animals, the things that they would need to live on, whatever it would be, would travel through here to go down to that lower part to where ships could come. Ships would come here, and they would have ships here. For many, until about the late 1890s, the only way to get goods from here to there, they had to be carried, manually carried by something, whether it was animals. Well, they did have they set up some type of way. I haven't seen any pictures of it yet, but they would like load boats, and they would carry them, slide them across, even some of that. But what they normally would have, the larger boats would come here, probably from Rome, where they would be coming from, and then they would have the smaller boats here. I don't know why they did the difference, but they did. And then they would carry those goods on to the Middle East and wherever it would be. And so that was a trade route, what it was. So Corinth is a very important city. Now I'm saying that because of what Paul will be doing shortly in the city of Corinth. We have to remember every time, whether it was Jesus, whether it was one of the apostles, whoever it would be, they would go usually to synagogues. They go there first. In any city they would go, they go to the Jewish synagogue because that's where the Jewish people were. And while Jesus was still here on earth, his mission, his fulfillment of prophecy was to tell and to teach the Jewish people that he was the Messiah and that they should follow him and his teachings. That was his goal. And then after his death and all, then that's what the apostles did in Acts 2, was they spoke to many people, but the vast majority of them in Jerusalem would have been Jewish people that would have knowledge of the Old Testament. Well, then eventually Paul and Peter both, they got to a point to where in their ministries they were still trying to teach the Jewish people, but at a time where they turned their backs on their teachings, then they would go to the Gentile world. And the Gentile world is everybody that wasn't that had not been under the Old Testament law. And so, as I say before, in today's terms, we are Gentiles compared to what the Jewish people in the world thinks today. So we have that. Now, with this here is 4 miles long, is what it is, and it created a very good route for them to have. This is a picture of the canal. This is the beginning of it. Right back there, and that blue in there, if I'm right, that's the ocean, part of the ocean back there. And I'm going to assume this is the upper end. I don't remember right now. And so this is 70, down here at the bottom, is 70 feet wide. Now, it's going to be wider than that up here. But if you notice, there's a bridge. I do not know if it's an automobile bridge, a train bridge, or if it's people bridge. Yes, Ann? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's neat. Ann says she has been there, and they walked from the sea up into Corinth. It's going to be up higher. If you'll notice right here, I do not know how high that is. But remember, this ship has to be at sea level. Water doesn't run uphill. It will run downhill, but it won't run uphill. So that's sea level. So from here to there is the elevation of the land at that particular point right there. And so now it can carry a fair-sized object. Now this is some type of cruise ship, and here's a tug pulling it through. It's not like the real big cruise ships, but can you imagine just looking back and thinking whenever and again, this is just about 1892 to somewhere, or 1888 in there somewhere. I don't remember the exact date. Here's some of the modern things today. There's a bridge. There's the ocean. And here is the canal. And so that has, in our life, in the last 150, 200 years, it has now allowed people to send goods and travel through and cut off many, many miles from the Rome, Italy area all the way to the Middle East is what it's done there. But just remember, in Paul's day, that was not there. It was still dirt. It was still rock. And so they would have, if you came to the beach here, you would have come to the beach and you would have walked uphill to whichever side, I don't remember which one now, probably that one, but I'm not sure, to where where the different monuments and things that had been built many, many years ago. All right, so we're going to stop with that right there. I just want to show you a few of the pictures. It's what I want to show you. Now, we have to remember this too. Let me show you a little bit more here. Here is Ashley, I guess what you would call today the old city of Corinth. This is the main city that Paul very likely, I feel very confident that Paul the apostle walked that street right there. Now, I can't promise you he did, but the likelihood he did. And that's still there, and it was built in 146, the city of Corinth was I don't know, right, destroyed. I guess that might be the best way to say it. The Roman Empire, they had rebelled somewhat against the Romans, and so they sent a general down there, and he destroyed the place, is what he did. Then in 46 BC, first one's 146 BC, 100 years later, Julius Caesar came back and he had all this rebuilt. Remember, since it is in Greece, I know you've heard the term Greek gods and so forth like that, mythology and so forth. They were big into that, and so that's what that was. Here is a street. Those little areas right there, it looks like little rooms, that would have been shops to where people would have, they would sell stuff. Now remember, people could travel, walk east to west, north to south, or travel by animal or whatever. And then if you had a main street, that'd be like McFarland Boulevard, I guess would be in Tuscaloosa. That's the main drag through town, and everything else kind of comes off of it. And it's somewhat like that. Here is, now since it is Greek and Greek mythology, they did not believe in the God that you and I believe in today. They had different gods for different things. They had a God for the air, for the sea, for the stars, for the moons. They had a God for fertility. They had a God for all different kind of things. Don't know how many. We do know that type of religious belief spread to many, many places. We remember when Paul was in one place, he said that he was basically astounded that you even have a idol to the unknown God just in case you forgot one, is what it was. And so that was a type of world that they were trying to put Christianity in, is what it was. And right here, again, this is the temple of Apollo right there, and here's just some more evidence. And that stuff is there where they had built the stuff 2,000 or more, over 2,000 years ago. All right, so don't forget Latin was a main language there. And so we'd like to get down now to slide 24, and we'll just start right there. One thing you may remember, and even in our world today, we have what's known as the Olympic Games. We have a Summer Olympics and a Winter Olympics. Well, that started in the general area of Greece back over 2,000 years ago. And they would do races and different things. And so what you see here is its location was near the scene of a Isthmian, I guess how you say it, games. And that was one of 4 games times that they would get together. Of course, now what they did a lot of times at these games, that was their excuse to get together and do sinful things. Orgies, drunkenness, partying, all types of things that it would be. And so it wasn't an unusual thing for the influence of what Rome was to be felt even in the city of Corinth, is what it would be. Now, it did mention, I've got here the 9th chapter, in verse 24 through 27. I'd like to read this. This is what Paul wrote, or had written, and it's this. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. And everyone who competes in the games exercise self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. But I buffet my body and make it a slave, lest possibly, after I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. So we see here two acts of a physical game type situation, running and boxing. So Paul even knew about boxing. And so he does have that put in the scriptures here to let us know. And this one good thing says there in verse 24, the last bit, run in such a way that you may win. Of course, he was talking there about them running the race of a Christian, is what he was talking about there. And so I thought it was interesting to see that even some of the things that were going on in Greece, everyday things, actually show up in Scripture. And it's found in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 and 27. Now, if you can imagine a place in the world where different sailors, different people from different backgrounds would come, and yet then have a country that believed in worshiping idols to the point that they built temples. They even had a temple there for the love god, to where they had 1,000 prostitutes that stayed there, is what they did. They were eventually known as Corinthian girls, is what they were known as. So you can see a very sinful place is what it would be. Well, Paul, on his second missionary journey, established the church in Corinth. And so then you wind up with it having problems. It may have been the first missionary journey. But anyway, the church was established. And we have to remember, when it was established, that was what's known as the first generation Christians. It's the first time there's Christians there. And they were given, we'll see later in the book, 1 Corinthians, we'll see some of the gifts that some of them were given by the Holy Spirit. But we see that there's going to be problems that he's going to deal with. Let me ask you this. You ever had a problem with a brother or sister in church? Don't nod your head. Don't do that, because if you do, well, I'll probably nod it yes. We sure have. Or have we heard or seen where problems occurred in a group of people trying to live a Christian life? And it does happen. Well, Paul had it to the extreme, I really believe. And here are some of the things that he had to deal with. And we'll see this in the first few chapters of the 1 Corinthians. In the first place, deplorable divisions had split the church into hostile factions, shattering the unity in which all who profess to be brothers in Christ should be bound together. We always want to try to do our very best to be like, we hear the term of Christian family, the church family we have, and so forth like that, and we want to always be together. Well, sadly, that was not the case. One of the problems he had to deal with is that some of the people in the church were following different prominent men. Apollos, Paul, Peter, Jesus, parts of say, some of you say, I am of whoever it was. And so you could see what division was occurring at that time. So we have that. Also, I believe it's in chapter, I don't know if it's in chapter 5, but it's not too far into the book of 1 Corinthians, that immorality. Now, again, just think of the place. Is there immoral things that go on in the city of Tuscaloosa? Yes. Is there things immoral that go on in the city of Birmingham? Yes. You pick a city, there's probably immoral things going on at that place. And so this is not something that is unusual. Now, the thing about this, though, the immorality was in the church family, is what it was. It says here that one of their number had been guilty of gross immorality of a kind which even the profligate society of that pagan city would have condemned. Even the Corinthians would have condemned this one, as sinful as they were. And yet the congregation had failed to impose discipline upon the offender by expelling him from their fellowship. And what we'll see was this: he took or married his father's wife. Whether or not the father was alive or dead, I don't know. But and I'll show you. We'll go back in the Old Testament and see. Under the law of Moses, that's condemned enough to be put to death. So that's not to be done. So we have that. That's another problem he had to deal with. Members of the church had been dragging each other before pagan secular courts for the settlement of disputes that had risen between them. Instead of resolving their quarrels in a spirit of Christian love within the community of the church, or being willing, after Christ's example, to endure wrongs without retaliation. So what they had been doing, they were taking brothers and sisters whenever they had some issue with them and taking them to the secular, the everyday, the Greek judges is what it would have been, and take them before their courts. Instead of trying to work that problem out inside the church, to where one of the things is to where whatever problems it was could be contained in that area and worked on and taken care of. So this was another problem that he showed. Even to the point, as far as example there, that even if you couldn't resolve it, you just let it go. That's basically what he's saying. And so that is something that's a problem. Now, that's only 3 things so far. Is that enough to keep Paul busy? He's going to be busy. Well, that's not all of them. Let's see some more. Some had been committing fornication with prostitutes and attempting to justify their conduct by arguing that the body only was involved and that the deeds of the body were of no consequence. And it's amazing how people in our world, or in their world at that time, the reasoning that they can come up with to justify whatever it is they're doing. It really is something. But folks, all I can say is just, what does the book say? What does the Bible say about a certain situation? And what it says, find all the scriptures you can find about that situation and put them down on paper and see what it says. And you'll get the right answer. Probably one you don't want to hear in that case. But that's another problem. So we had that. Now remember though, in this city of vast immorality and that temple on a mountain, we didn't see the picture, I didn't mention about the mountain, but it was it's like almost 2,000 feet high. And that's where the temple was for the prostitutes to live in. And so the thing about it is, you were worshiping that God too, whatever that God's name was. All right. The supper of the Lord, what we call the Lord's Supper days, which should have been an expression of loving harmony, had degenerated into an occasion for irrelevance, gluttony, and uncharitable behavior. They were making it just like the Greeks when they had their orgies and their parties and stuff, and eating and drinking and all that type of stuff. That's what they were doing when it was time to do the Lord's Supper, is what it was. And so that was an issue that Paul was going to have to deal with. There was disorderly and unedifying scenes when they met together for public worship, especially in the exercise of spiritual gifts with which they had been blessed. We'll see in 1 Corinthians, some had the ability to speak in tongues, to prophesy, and heal people and so forth like that. Well, again, these gifts were given to someone that at the time probably was not mature enough to know and how to handle those things, and they got to where one thought they were better than the other. My gift is better than your gift, and that type thing. So you can see that. Paul finds it necessary to remind them that the gift which is best of all and most to be coveted is the gift of love, apart from which all other gifts are worthless. And if you remember 1 Corinthians, the chapter 13, you remember what everybody calls that? Anybody know the name? Love chapter. And that's the one When I was in the 5th grade in my grammar school, or junior, well, I guess grammar school, assignment for each of us that year, I don't know how long we had to do this, we had to memorize 1 Corinthians 13 and stand up in front of the class and say it back to them. Would you get to hear that today? No. That's how far sin has gotten in our world. So that's another thing that he did, is that they had problems with that. In example 13, the love chapter. False teaching, which by its denial of the facts of Christ's resurrection and indeed of the possibility of any resurrection from the dead, struck at the very cornerstone of the Christian faith that had gained a footing in the Corinthian church. So, and Paul and Peter, but especially Paul, quite often had to deal with false teaching. That was the main thing that he was having to deal with very much. So that is 5, 6, or 7 issues that he had to deal with, the big ones. Would you believe there's some more? And here they are. Other doctrinal issues that Paul had in the church there. One was, this is some questions that the church had at the time, some of it. Was it advisable for Christians to enter into the marriage state? And if you remember, Paul was single, and he actually told people that it would be better for you to be single, but in case your desires overtook you, it would be better for you to marry, is what it was. And we'll see that. So that's one of the problems, was that should the Christian person be able to enter into a marriage state? Also, should a husband or wife, after being converted, continue to live with an unconverted or unbelieving partner? That, wouldn't you think that would be, in a sense, a legitimate question to ask? Especially if the other person was against you following the teachings of the apostles and of Jesus. We could see where that would be. And then, what should be the attitude of a Christian toward the eating of meat which had previously been offered in sacrifices to idols? That meat was not just destroyed, it could be then turned around and sold to people. And there was a business in that city where people would take the meat that would have been cooked for idols. You have to remember, this is idol worshiping. This is not the burning of meat as a sacrifice to God that the Jewish people would do. This would be for that. And so is it right for a Christian to eat the meat that was meat that had been basically given to worship toward an idol? So that's the question. Should women have their heads covered when attending public worship? That was another question that he had to deal with. And we'll speak more about that when we get to it. What is the significance of the variety of spiritual gifts? He had to address the fact of the spiritual gifts that they had. And there really wasn't one that was greater than the other. Also, the collection for money to be sent. This is found in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, to where the Christians and the poverty-stricken Christians that was at Jerusalem, about how they were to have money gathered together, ready for Paul, that when he came to where there'd be no gathering, wouldn't be any gathering of money, taking time, because we don't know where all the different people lived, how many miles out of town or whatever it might be that they would be, to where they could then take that money back to the Christian people. So we see here the first Corinthians deals with a lot of initial issues that the young church had as it was being established in that world. That's what it is. And on top of that, to be established in the city of Corinth made it even worse. But you can remember this. If the church can flourish, and it did, in the city of Corinth, as wicked as it was, it can flourish anywhere, even in our world today. Well, it's about time for the bell to end, to ring. We're going to stop till next week. We'll start with 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And if anyone needs a copy of it, wants to it for next week, I have it, be glad to give it to you. Thank you very much. Class dismissed.